I used to think my biggest problem was deciding whether to get the extended warranty on my car. That was before Detective Hayes sat across from me in a windowless room and slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were photographs of a crime scene 2,000 miles away in a city I had never set foot in. My fingerprints were all over it, clear as day, undeniable. The detective leaned back in his chair, studying my face like I was a puzzle he was determined to solve. I stared at those images, my hands trembling, knowing that everything I had built could crumble in an instant. Before I dive into what happened next, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Hit that like button if you have ever been accused of something you did not do. And subscribe because this story takes a turn nobody saw coming, least of all me. What started as a nightmare about stolen fingerprints became a fight to prove I even existed. Stay with me because by the end you will understand why trust is the most fragile thing we own. My name is Marcus, and 3 months ago I was living what most people would call an ordinary life. I worked as a software engineer for a mid-sized tech company in Portland, Oregon. I had a decent apartment, a small circle of friends, and a routine that rarely changed. Wake up at 6:30, hit the gym, grab coffee from the place on the corner where Linda knew my order before I opened my mouth. Tuesdays were Thai food with my buddy James. Weekends were hiking or catching up on work I had pushed off during the week. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated. Just steady. I had never been to Detroit, never had a reason to go. No family there, no business trips, no college buddies who had settled in Michigan. If you had asked me to point it out on a map, I could have done it, but that was about the extent of my connection to the place. So, when my phone rang on a Thursday afternoon, and the voice on the other end introduced himself as Detective William Hayes from the Detroit Police Department, my first thought was that it had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe a wrong number. Maybe a prank. It was not a prank. Detective Hayes had a voice like gravel calm, but heavy. He asked if I was Marcus Brennan, born March 14, 1994, residing at my current address in Portland. I confirmed, feeling my stomach tighten. He asked if I had ever traveled to Detroit. I said no. He paused, and I heard the papers rustling in the background. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. He told me my fingerprints had been recovered from a crime scene in Detroit 2 weeks prior. A break-in at a high-end jewelry store. $70,000 in merchandise stolen. My prints were on the display case on the door handle on the counter. I laughed. It was a reflex, nervous and sharp. I told him that was impossible. I had never been to Detroit. There had to be a mistake, maybe a mix-up in the database. Detective Hayes did not laugh. He said they had run the prints 3 times through the system. Every single scan came back with my name. He said he understood this must be confusing, but he needed me to come to Detroit to clear things up. Voluntarily, he emphasized, "For now." I sat there in my apartment phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what I had just heard. I asked if I was being arrested. He said not yet, but the evidence was strong enough that if I did not cooperate, a warrant could be issued. He suggested I get a lawyer. That was when the panic really hit. I had never needed a lawyer in my life. I had never even gotten a speeding ticket. And now I was being connected to a felony in a city I had never visited. I called James immediately after I hung up with Hayes. James worked in finance, not law, but he was the most level-headed person I knew. I told him everything, my words tumbling out in a chaotic rush. He listened without interrupting, which I appreciated, and then he said the exact thing I needed to hear. He said we would figure it out. He said it had to be a mistake, and mistakes could be fixed. He recommended a lawyer he knew through a friend, someone who handled criminal defense. Her name was Angela Torres, and she agreed to meet with me the next morning. That night, I did not sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible explanation. Had someone stolen my identity? Was there a glitch in the fingerprint database? Could someone actually fake fingerprints? I had seen it in movies, but I had no idea if it was real. The more I thought about it, the more trapped I felt. My entire life could be upended by something I had no control over, something I had not done. Angela Torres met me at her office downtown. She was in her mid-40s, sharp-eyed with an air of someone who had seen every trick in the book. I told her the whole story, and she took notes, nodding occasionally. When I finished, she looked up and asked if I had any idea how my fingerprints could have ended up in Detroit. I shook my head. She asked if I had any enemies, anyone who might want to frame me. I told her no. I was a software engineer. I kept to myself. I did not have drama in my life. Angela said the first step was to go to Detroit, meet with Detective Hayes, and see the evidence firsthand. She said running would make me look guilty, and cooperation was the only way to prove my innocence. She would come with me. We booked flights for 2 days later. I called my boss and explained I had a family emergency. I could not exactly say I was flying across the country because the police thought I was a jewel thief. The flight to Detroit felt endless. I kept imagining what would happen when we landed. Would they arrest me at the airport? Would I end up in handcuffs in front of strangers? Angela sat beside me reviewing case files on her laptop, calm and focused. I envied her composure. My hands would not stop shaking. We met Detective Hayes at the precinct on a gray Monday morning. The building was old, the kind of place where the fluorescent lights buzzed, and the air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. Hayes was exactly what I had imagined from his voice, mid-50s graying hair, a face that had seen too much and believed too little. He shook Angela's hand, first, then mine. His grip was firm, evaluating. He led us to an interview room. White walls, a metal table, 3 chairs, a camera mounted in the corner. He set the manila folder down and opened it. Inside were photographs, crime scene photos, shattered glass, empty display cases, and then the fingerprint analysis reports. My name was printed at the top in bold letters. The prints matched mine with a 98% certainty. I stared at those swirling patterns, the loops and ridges that were supposed to be unique to me, and I felt like I was looking at evidence of a crime committed by a ghost wearing my skin. Detective Hayes walked us through the timeline. The break-in occurred at 2:17 a.m. on a Sunday. The alarm was triggered, but by the time officers arrived, the suspects were gone. No surveillance footage. The cameras had been disabled beforehand, but the thieves had been sloppy. They left prints. My prints. On multiple surfaces. Hayes said they had checked for other suspects, but so far, I was the only lead. I told him again that I had never been to Detroit. Angela asked if they had any evidence placing me in the city at the time of the crime. Hayes admitted they did not. No airline records, no hotel bookings, no credit card transactions. Nothing. But he said the prints did not lie. He asked where I was on the night of the break-in. I pulled out my phone and checked my calendar. That Sunday I had been home in Portland. Alone. No alibi. I had spent the day meal prepping and watching a documentary about ocean ecosystems. Not exactly the kind of evening that left witnesses. Angela asked to see the full forensic report. Hayes handed it over. She scanned it, her expression unreadable. Then she asked how the prints were collected. Hayes said they used standard dusting techniques and digital scanning. Everything was by the book. Angela asked if there was any chance of contamination or error. Hayes said the lab had triple-checked. The prints were clear and a definitive match. I felt the walls closing in. This was not a mistake. This was not a glitch. Somehow, impossibly, my fingerprints were at that crime scene. And I had no explanation. Detective Hayes leaned forward, his elbows on the table. He said he wanted to believe me, but he needed something more than my word. He needed proof that I was not in Detroit. He needed an alternative explanation. Without that, he had no choice but to move forward with the investigation. And that meant I was now officially a suspect. We left the precinct in silence. Angela said we needed to dig into my background, my daily life, anything that might explain how this happened. She asked if I had ever donated fingerprints for any reason. I thought hard. I had applied for a few jobs over the years that required background checks. I had volunteered at a community center once that asked for fingerprinting. But those records were supposed to be secure. Angela said we needed to track down every instance where my prints were on file. Over the next few days, I did exactly that. I contacted every employer, every organization, every agency that had ever taken my fingerprints. I requested records, asked questions, dug through old emails. Most of the responses were bureaucratic dead ends. No one had any information that seemed useful. But then I got a call from a woman named Diane at the community center. She said their records from 5 years ago had been part of a data breach. Personal information, including fingerprint scans, had been compromised. I felt a jolt of adrenaline. This was it. This had to be it. I called Angela immediately. She said this was promising, but we needed more. We needed to prove that someone had accessed my prints from that breach and used them to commit the crime. That meant finding out who was behind the robbery. Detective Hayes was not going to do that legwork for us. We were on our own. I started researching the jewelry store. It was called Prestige Gems, located in an upscale shopping district. I found articles about the robbery. The owner, a man named Gerald Winters, had been interviewed. He said it was a professional job, well planned and executed. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. I looked up Winters online. He had a clean reputation, no shady connections that I could find. But something about the whole situation felt off. Why would professional thieves leave fingerprints? It did not make sense. Then things got worse. A local news station in Detroit picked up the story. They did not name me, but they reported that police had identified a suspect in the Prestige Gems robbery. A man from Portland, Oregon. My phone started ringing. Friends asking if I was okay. Colleagues whispering in the break room. My boss called me into his office and asked point blank if I was involved in something illegal. I told him no, absolutely not, and I explained the situation. He said he believed me, but he looked uncomfortable. I could see the doubt in his eyes, and I could not blame him. If someone had told me this story, I would have doubted it too. My parents called. They lived in Arizona, retired, and mostly out of the loop with my day-to-day life. But my mom had seen something online. She asked if I was in trouble. I tried to downplay it, but my voice cracked. She said they were coming to Portland. I told her not to, that I was handling it, but she would not hear it. 2 days later, they were on my doorstep. My dad looked worried. My mom looked heartbroken. She asked how this could be happening. I had no answer. The worst part was not the investigation. It was the way people started looking at me, like I was a stranger, like I was capable of something dark. James stood by me, but even he seemed cautious. He asked questions I had already answered as if he was trying to catch me in a lie. I could not be angry at him. Trust is fragile, and once it cracks, it is almost impossible to repair. Angela called one evening with news. She had been digging into the data breach at the community center, and she found something. The breach had been traced to a hacking group that operated out of Eastern Europe. They sold stolen data on the dark web. Fingerprints, social security numbers, medical records, everything. She said it was possible someone had purchased my prints and used them to frame me, but proving it would be nearly impossible. The people who bought that data were ghosts. No names, no trails. I felt despair settle over me like a heavy fog. Even if we knew how it happened, we could not prove who did it. And without that, I was still the prime suspect. Detective Hayes called again. He said the district attorney was reviewing the case. They were considering filing charges. Angela said we were running out of time. She suggested I take a polygraph test. It was not admissible in court, but it might buy us some goodwill with the police. I agreed. The polygraph was scheduled for the following week. I flew back to Detroit, my parents insisting on coming with me. The examiner was a stoic woman who hooked me up to the machine and asked a series of baseline questions. Then the real questions started. Did you commit the robbery at Prestige Gems Number? Have you ever been to Detroit? No. Did you provide your fingerprints to anyone for the purpose of committing a crime? No. The examiner said nothing when we finished. She said the results would be sent to Detective Hayes. 3 days later, Angela called. I passed the polygraph. Hayes had the results, but he said it did not change the physical evidence. The prints were still mine. The polygraph only showed I believed I was telling the truth. It did not prove I was innocent. I wanted to scream. What more could I do? I had cooperated. I had taken the test. I had handed over every piece of my life for scrutiny. And it still was not enough. That night, I sat in my apartment alone. My parents had gone back to Arizona exhausted and scared. I stared at the wall, numb. My career was hanging by a thread. My reputation was in tatters, and I was no closer to clearing my name. I thought about what would happen if I was charged. A trial. Months, maybe years of my life consumed by this nightmare. Even if I was acquitted, the damage was done. People would always wonder. They would always doubt. And then, in that moment of utter hopelessness, I decided I was not going to let this destroy me. I was not going to sit back and wait for someone else to fix this. I was going to find out who did this, and I was going to prove it. I started where Angela had left off. The data breach. I reached out to a contact I had from college, a guy named Travis who worked in cybersecurity. I told him what happened, and he agreed to help. Travis was brilliant, the kind of person who could trace digital footprints through layers of encryption and dead ends. He said it would take time, but he would see what he could find. While Travis worked on the digital side, I focused on the robbery itself. I flew back to Detroit on my own dime and rented a cheap motel room near Prestige Gems. I spent days walking around the area talking to people, trying to piece together anything that might help. I spoke to the owner, Gerald Winters. He was polite but distant. He said the police were handling it, and he did not have anything to add. I asked if he had any idea who might have targeted his store. He said no. High-end jewelry stores were always targets. It came with the territory. But something in his tone felt rehearsed. I pressed a little. I asked if he had noticed anything unusual in the days leading up to the robbery. He hesitated. Then he mentioned a man who had come into the store a week before the break-in. The man had asked a lot of questions about the security system, claiming he was interested in upgrading his home security and wanted recommendations. Winters had thought it was odd, but had not reported it. I asked if he remembered what the man looked like. Winters described him mid-30s, medium build, dark hair, unremarkable. But he remembered one detail. The man had an accent. Eastern European Winters thought. Maybe Russian or Ukrainian. That detail hit me like a lightning bolt. The data breach had been traced to Eastern Europe. Travis had mentioned the hacking group operated out of that region. This could not be a coincidence. I called Angela and told her what I had learned. She said it was circumstantial, but it was something. We needed more. Travis called a few days later. He had found a lead. The data from the community center breach had been sold on a dark web marketplace that was eventually shut down by law enforcement. But before it was taken offline, someone had downloaded a large batch of files that included fingerprint scans. Travis traced the download to an IP address in Ukraine. From there, the trail went cold. But he found one more thing, a username associated with the download Nighthawk87. Travis said he had seen that username pop up in forums related to identity theft and fraud. Whoever Nighthawk87 was, they were experienced. I asked Travis if there was any way to connect Nighthawk87 to the Detroit robbery. He said it would be a long shot, but he could try. He started combing through forums looking for any mention of Prestige Gems or Detroit. Days passed. I barely slept. I lived on coffee and adrenaline. And then Travis found something. A post from 6 months ago before the robbery, where Nighthawk87 bragged about a job in the Midwest. The post was vague, but it mentioned high-value merchandise and a foolproof way to avoid detection. Travis said it was not proof, but it was close. Angela said we needed to take this to Detective Hayes. I flew back to Detroit one more time, armed with everything Travis had found. Hayes listened, his expression skeptical, but not dismissive. He said the information was interesting, but it was not enough for the district attorney. We needed something concrete, a name, a confession, something that directly tied Nighthawk87 to the crime. I felt the frustration boiling over. I had done everything I could. I had uncovered more than the police had, and it still was not enough. I looked Hayes in the eye and said I was not going to stop. I told him I would find Nighthawk87 myself if I had to. Hayes warned me not to do anything stupid. He said if I interfered with the investigation, I could make things worse. But I did not care. My life was already in ruins. I had nothing left to lose. Travis and I kept digging. We found another forum post from Nighthawk87, this one more recent. It mentioned a new job in Chicago. Travis said if we could trace this person's activity, we might be able to find a pattern, a location, a real identity. We worked around the clock, and finally we got a break. Travis traced a payment linked to Nighthawk87 to a cryptocurrency wallet. From there, he found a series of transactions that led to a bank account in Detroit. The account was under a fake name, but the address on file was real. An apartment building on the east side of the city. I called Angela. She said we had to turn this over to the police. I agreed, but I wanted to see the place first. I wanted to know if this was real. Travis came with me. We drove to the address, a rundown building in a rough neighborhood. We did not go inside. We just watched. And after an hour, a man walked out. Mid-30s, dark hair, medium build. The description matched what Winters had told me. I took a photo and sent it to Angela. She forwarded it to Detective Hayes. Within hours, the police had a warrant. They raided the apartment and found everything. Stolen jewelry from Prestige Gems, equipment for creating fake fingerprints using scanned data, and files. Digital files that included my fingerprint scans along with dozens of others. The man was arrested. His real name was Alexei Volkov, a Ukrainian national with a history of identity theft and fraud. He was Nighthawk 87. Detective Hayes called me the next day. He said the charges against me were being dropped. Volkov had confessed to the robbery and admitted to using stolen fingerprints to throw the police off his trail. He had purchased my prints from the dark web and used a technique involving 3D printing and conductive materials to plant them at the scene. It was sophisticated, almost unheard of, but it had worked. Until now, I should have felt relief, but all I felt was exhaustion and anger. Anger at Volkov for stealing my identity. Anger at the system for being so ready to believe I was guilty. Anger at the people who had doubted me. But also, I felt something else. A strange kind of pride. I had fought back. I had refused to let this destroy me. And I had won. The months that followed were a slow process of rebuilding. The news of my exoneration did not spread as widely as the initial accusations. Some people never heard I was cleared. Others heard, but still looked at me differently. My boss welcomed me back, but the atmosphere at work had changed. I could feel the lingering doubt in the room. After a few weeks, I decided to leave. I found a new job at a startup in Seattle, a fresh start. My relationship with James recovered, though it took time. He apologized for doubting me, and I told him I understood. Trust is earned, and sometimes it has to be earned again. My parents visited more often as if they were making up for the time they spent worried and helpless. I appreciated it, even when it felt smothering. I stayed in touch with Travis. He became more than just a contact from college. He became a friend. We joked about starting a side business helping people fight identity theft, but neither of us followed through. Some battles are better left in the past. Angela sent me a bill for her services, and I paid it without complaint. She had believed in me when few others did. She had fought for me. That was worth every penny. I sent her a thank you card along with the check. She wrote back saying she was glad it worked out, and to call if I ever needed anything. I hoped I never would, but it was good to know the option was there. I never spoke to Alexei Volkov. I did not want to. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for identity theft, fraud, and burglary. That felt like justice, though it did not undo the damage he had caused. Not just to me, but to the dozens of other people whose identities he had stolen. I thought about them sometimes, wondering if they even knew. What I learned from all of this is that identity is fragile. We think of ourselves as solid, unchangeable. But our lives are built on data, numbers, scans, records, and all of it can be stolen, manipulated, weaponized. I also learned that proving your innocence is harder than it should be. The system is designed to find guilt, not to protect the wrongly accused. If I had not fought back, if I had not had the resources and the support, I would have been convicted. That thought haunts me. But I also learned that I am stronger than I thought. I did not crumble. I did not give up. I stood my ground and demanded the truth. And in the end, the truth won. Not because the system handed it to me, but because I went out and found it myself. I still live in Seattle. I still work as a software engineer. I still have my routines. But I am more careful now. I check my credit reports religiously. I use two-factor authentication on everything. I think twice before giving out personal information. And I never ever take my identity for granted. Sometimes people ask me how I stayed sane during those months, how I kept going when everything seemed hopeless. I tell them I did not have a choice. When your back is against the wall, you either fight or you fall. I chose to fight. And maybe that is the real lesson. Not that the system will protect you, but that you have to protect yourself. You have to be willing to stand up even when it feels impossible. Especially when it feels impossible. So, if you have ever felt like the world was against you, like the truth did not matter, like you were drowning in accusations you could not escape, I want you to know something. You are not alone. And you are stronger than you think. Do not let them break you. Do not let them take your name. Fight for it. Because your identity is yours. And no one has the right to steal it. Have you ever been accused of something you did not do? How did you handle it? Drop your story in the comments below. I would love to hear it. And if this story resonated with you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more real-life stories that remind us we are all in this together. Thank you for watching, and remember, your truth is worth fighting for. Stay strong out there.